very silent. Is everybody awake? You're good? I've seen you in other venues. I know how you can be. Ça me fait plaisir de vous voir ce matin. Well, Jeff, this was a great introduction. Thank you so much. It was a great introduction because actually this morning again I was talking to my team and I was looking at the numbers of where Canada was at the end of the Second World War when it came to aerospace. And obviously that was the work of the great C.D. Howe, with all his successors have said, oh, I'm the C.D. Howe of my time. I won't say that. But what I can say, though, is that at the end of the Second World War, Canada had within its military, had 2,000 aircrafts, 2,000. We were the fourth biggest aerospace industry, and in our military, because we had 2,000 aircrafts, we were the fourth after the US, the USSR, and the UK. So we have a great legacy. Et c'est donc pourquoi ça fait partie de notre ADN. It's part of our DNA. Moi, ça me fait plaisir d'être ici. Merci, Mike. Thanks, Mike, for being here and organizing this, and I know you'll ask tough questions after this. Mais je suis contente de vous revoir à nouveau parce qu'on a eu l'occasion de se voir certains d'entre nous au Bourget, à Paris, après à travers mes différentes rencontres avec plusieurs d'entre vous, aussi à travers les différents dîners-conférences que j'ai fait avec les chambres de commerce à partout à travers le pays. Et là, pourquoi pas aujourd'hui encore. On sait que la force d'un pays dépend beaucoup de la force de son économie. Et présentement, il y a beaucoup d'incertitudes. On vit dans un monde beaucoup plus complexe, beaucoup plus dangereux. We live in a much more complex and dangerous world. And it is a world that is impacted by tensions, may they be geopolitical or trade tensions. And throughout all these different events and what we're following every day when we look at the media coverage or social media, we can have a feeling that so much uncertainty is linked to a lack of control. But at the end of the day, we know that there are things we can't control. But there are a lot of things we can control. And my pitch to you is to focus on what we can control. And I presented 2 weeks ago the vision basically was Canada's plan for industrial leadership. So I wanted to focus on that plan while linking it to the aerospace sector. And of course, afterwards, we'll be able to discuss more about it. But the plan is to the plan is to protect, to create, and to attract. So the first pillar is to protect jobs, protect industries. We already know that there are many industries that are tariff. That is not the case for aerospace, but I'm very much aware, because many of you have reached out to us, that you're impacted somehow by tariffs because there are tariffs on derivative products on steel and aluminum. And so we will work with you to make sure that we can help you deal with the impacts of these tariffs, but also continue to invest in your businesses, make sure that you can support adaptation and help pivot your operations. We know also that we can develop an even stronger market at home through procurement, but also major projects. And we know that Canada already stands very tall when it comes to aerospace. Puis on le sait parce qu'on pense à Bombardier, bien entendu, au Québec. Pierre est ici, j'imagine que toute ton équipe est ici, qui collabore avec Saab pour élaborer un meilleur avion de surveillance à travers le monde, qui s'appelle le Global Eye. Je pense aussi à CAE à Montréal, dont les simulateurs de vol qui sont extraordinaires, font la fierté du Canada. D'ailleurs, le premier ministre était récemment en Asie et a visité CAE dans le cadre de son voyage il y a à peine quelques jours. And across the country, we know that MDA Space is building the fantastic satellites that we're all very proud, and the Avalon in Calgary is also building the great water bombers that are so iconic. So we must protect this legacy. And that's my point, because they're not just companies, they're national champions. And let me be very clear, my job is to make sure that we build more national champions and that we build our national champions to become even greater. And so you can count me as an ally. So that's the first pillar of the plan, protect jobs. Now let's go to the second pillar of the plan, which is to create jobs. We know that we are going to invest even more in defense. You've heard about it. Some of you have even created parts of your companies as subsidiaries linked to defense. And when we think about defense, we think of a broader definition than only the sovereignty, the protection of our sovereignty over land, sea, and air, and obviously digital. We're also thinking about space, but we're also thinking about dealing with threats such as health threats and the impacts of the pandemic, past pandemics, but also potentially future ones, and also the impacts of climate change, including wildfires. So you have to understand that when we think about defense, it's the role of the Canadian Armed Forces in dealing with all these threats and the protection of our sovereignty. And I really think that when it comes to aerospace, in the context of creating jobs, we must be bold. We must have a lot of ambition, because I really, really think that we can build and even rebuild the sector to become even stronger. And that's what I said to a couple of you when we met at the Paris Air Show back in Paris, back in June. There will be much more defense investments, obviously, and we will be working on our defense industrial strategy. But the defense industrial strategy will be also linked to three key words. We will buy, we will build, and we will partner. So sometimes we'll decide to buy off the shelf, but when we will buy off the shelf, we will make sure that there are Canadian jobs created through the supply chain. And that will be very, very important to us. And there will be requirements, obviously, of Canadian content. We will also build. I think we can build more. We've done it a lot on the national shipbuilding side because we have the national shipbuilding strategy. And at this point, we have shipyards in Halifax and in Vancouver, Seaspan, Irving, and also we have Davie in Quebec that have a book of business for the next 10 years. And they can export. And so we understand that we can build in this country. We've done it with shipbuilding. We can do it even more with aerospace. And we're doing it already with the, obviously, water bombers, the satellites, etc. But I want us to do more here. And finally, we will partner. And I think that the partnerships are really interesting in order to really focus on export and be able to get a bigger piece of the business that is linked to the increase of defense spending, defense investments in the world. And I'm thinking obviously of the Bombardier-SAM partnership as an example. So you have to remind yourselves that the buy, build, and partner approach will be in the defense industrial strategy. We're right now defining what will be our sovereign capabilities. So what does that mean? It means for national security reasons, we will make sure that there are certain type of capabilities that we will build in Canada and that we will procure through Canadian companies or Canadian companies that have a footprint in Canada, because we will make sure that we create jobs here. And we will take the defense investments and we will use it as an economic lever, because at the end of the day, what we know from companies, and having been in business in the past, I remember these days very fondly, companies rather have contracts than subsidies. And so we'll focus on that. The defense industrial strategy will be ready before the end of the year. So the end of the year is coming in 2 months. So you will hear from the Minister of Defense and myself in the next 2 months. And of course, we're working with the Secretary of State to Defense Procurement, Steve Fuhr, as well. The third pillar and last one of our plan is attract talent, attract investment. Well, in the aerospace sector, we very much know that it is a very R&D focused sector. And so it's a collaboration between government, defense, academia, and businesses. We will come up with a talent attraction strategy. It will be coming up within the next weeks before the end of the year. And obviously the budget is next Tuesday, so I'll have more to say after the budget. But the talent attraction strategy is a key piece for the sector, because we know that we need to be able to attract the best talent, and we know that we need to do the right investments in research. And while other countries are cutting in research, we won't. We will double down, and we'll make sure that it's part also of our way to continue to create economic growth in our country. And when it comes to attracting investments, well, we know we're a very stable country, stable jurisdiction. We'll cut red tape. We want things to go faster. We have a defense investment agency now. I'll have the chance to answer questions regarding that, but that's also part of the red tape cutting to make sure that you can understand whether the procurement coming up, that we can prioritize the procurements based on what is needed on the military capability side, but also what is needed to really create jobs quickly and bring certainty to the sector. So my point is we'll be open for business, and we'll try to attract also more foreign direct investment in our sector. So after protecting, creating, and attracting, I think we'll be able to show Canadians, and obviously show the industry, that we have a real plan. It's based on a clear vision, and we can control what we can control. These are real investments that will create real jobs and that will create real growth. So, enough of the talking, let's have a conversation. Looking forward to working with you, all of you. Merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you, Minister, for those words, and it's great
Thank you, Mike.
Great to see you again.
Pleasure.
I think we keep running into each other every week here.
I know.
And I want to thank you for attending and championing our industry at every chance you get. In particular, the Paris Air Show in, I always think it's July, but it's actually in June. You're right. And couldn't agree with you more on the protect, create, and attract. And we need to protect what we have. We're one of the very few countries in the world that can design from a sheet of paper and certify. And then I think the most important piece is export. 80 to 90% of what we do is export related. So creating and attracting those good paying jobs, absolutely critical. Want to talk about some of the things that we can control, because I think that's a very good way of saying it. I want to touch on the Strategic Innovation Fund, something under your department. In the past, we had dedicated aerospace innovation streams. We had the Strategic Innovation Fund. Now we have the Strategic Response Fund.
Yes.
I'd love to get your thoughts, especially for this room, because the innovation side is so critical to the protection and creation of jobs.
Yeah.
What do the folks need to know about that new, old program?
Okay, and some of you have heard me, but talking about this, but I have a soft spot for aerospace because my dad comes from a small town that became eventually part of the Mirabel city. My grandparents were expropriated because of that big project at the time of building an airport, but my dad always wanted to become a pilot, and he's fascinated by planes. Unfortunately, he became an accountant, Him and I share this passion for planes. Being the former foreign minister, at one point I had enough of that passion, having done 55 countries in 3 years and a half. But basically, and coming obviously from a town that is, a city that is extremely important when it comes to aerospace, which is Montreal. I will continue to believe in the sector, but I'm also frustrated with some industrial choices that we've made in the past regarding aerospace. I think that we could have done more, and I think that our investments in the past that were too low in our Canadian Armed Forces have also hurt the aerospace sector. And so, for me, Mike, when you talk about the Strategic Response Fund, because the Strategic Innovation Fund doesn't exist anymore. It's been just rolled into the Strategic Response Fund, a $5 billion fund, which is to support industries impacted by tariffs, and also to attract foreign direct investments or attract bigger investments and to be able to create jobs in the country. If you have a good project, we'll invest in it, period. But I really think that the opportunity is also much more on the defense procurement side. And that's why you heard me saying, I know that companies rather have contracts than subsidies. Because when you're in business, you want to know, okay, I want to deal with my risks. I want to seize this opportunity. How can I have predictability in a world that is so complicated and unpredictable? Well, if you have a 10-year contract, you can then invest more, you can hire, you can, take more risks and increase your footprint. And I think there's really a lack of trust between the Canadian Armed Forces and the Canadian industry. This is not, it's not as if I'm throwing this out there. I think everybody knows it, and I think that's my job to work with the Minister of Defense to recreate that trust. Because I think that we have great companies and great business leaders. So to your question on the Strategic Response Fund side, we'll make the investments needed to make sure that the industry is competitive, and I look forward to working with you. I've already started having conversations with some of you. But I think that the military investments will drive much more of the demand, and a lot of them will become dual use anyways. It will have an impact on the commercial side of the aerospace sector as well.
Well, as we've talked about before, especially in aerospace, the civil side and the defense side is so intertwined across the board. Maybe just turning to the defense side of things, we had Minister Fuhr last night, but I'd love to get you...
Was he good?
He was excellent, as are you. And
I'm seeing him later today.
So we're gonna compare notes here, but I think so far you're very well aligned. Maybe just a question on the defense industrial strategy, and I've taken note, and I really do like how you phrased it, the buy, build, and partner. And I think we need to be very strategic of what can we do in the country, what can't we do, and then partner. And the overriding goal is to build the Canadian defense industrial base in whatever model is being used. But I'd love to hear an update from you on the defense industrial strategy, and then maybe how you see that tying into the Defense Investment Agency.
Well, as the Minister of Industry, I look at what are my economic levers to create jobs, and I think the defense industrial strategy is one of the biggest ones. The two others are major projects, which we're working on, and we've already announced a first tranche of projects across the country, and we'll be looking at ports, airports, etc. So that's interesting for the aerospace sector. And the other one is really building national champions. I want to build big Canadian companies. Why? Because it's a question of having influence in the world. And more we're able to have big companies, more we're able to pursue our interests in the world. And we have not been great at championing our own companies. We have Some, obviously, Bombardier, CE are examples. You have Maple Leaf Foods, Aritzia, Lululemon, Thomson Reuters. But if you look at, in the 90s where we were in terms of big companies and where we are now, we're not at the same level. And you're seeing a wave of protectionism around the world. And it is linked also to the fact that a lot of countries will try to push for their own businesses. And so if we're not able on the private sector side to be strong and to be able to be bold, we will lose part of that market, because protectionism is just going to affect all of us. And that's a partnership between government and champions. But going back on the defense industrial strategy, Mike, I think it's the question of trust I talked to you about is really important, because why I say that, in every procurement, there will be 3 conditions that we'll be looking at. First, what are the military capabilities? Is basically the proponent filling that. It's not only the military capabilities in terms of exactly what the procurement is saying, which can be extremely frustrating sometimes, and we need to look at that. But it's much more overall. Is this a sub that makes sense? Is this a plane that makes sense, etc.? The second one is, what's the geopolitical alignment if we're buying, for example? So does it make sense to be too dependent on the American military industrial complex? Well, we have to diversify, but we have this important relationship also that we want to pursue. So, what do we do? And the third conditions will be job creation. And that it's more than ITBs. It's concretely speaking, if we're buying subs, for example, from a country, how many planes will that country buy from us? What will be the other things they'll put on the table? I'm into deal making right now. I'm into pushing for you guys and pushing for our companies. So that's the world in which we are in. There's the policy, there are these criteria, buy, build partners, the 3 conditions I've given you, the Defense Investment Agency that will be able to help not only say, okay, this procurement is coming up, what are our sovereign capabilities? So, okay, do we go on the international market or not? Or no, we can do all in Canada. We need more VCs to build that company. We need to build our Maple 8, investing much more in our companies. That's going to be like the role of Doug Guzman, in charge of the Defense Investment Agency. That will be his job. And so you can see how the defense industrial strategy is developing. It's about ultimately making sure that we're building our industries here to support our defense sector.
Excellent, Minister. We're into overtime. We're going to go just a little bit in. We're not going to go 18 innings.
And I know my answers are long.
Don't worry. No. I had 2 questions. I was going to ask for a sneak peek on the budget, but I'm not going to ask that. We don't have enough time, and I don't think you'd give me much anyways. But I do want to touch on the collaboration piece. And we just had a panel just before on the trust and collaboration between the industry and Transport Canada. We have the trust and collaboration, say, on the need to maintain zero for zero trade with the U.S., with the industry here and the industry in the U.S. But I want to focus in on the trust and collaboration, and you'd mentioned it before, between the government, the CAF, and the industry. And how do you see that? What are some of the practical things that we can do? And I think it's a two-way street. Also, the industry. What does the industry need to do to have that renewed relationship? And I was so encouraged by your leadership, by the Prime Minister's leadership in announcing the Defense Investment Agency. The third pillar was that renewed collaboration between industry, the CAF, and the government. And I think the political leadership that the government is showing right now is so critical. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I've got to know the Canadian Forces being the foreign minister for the past 3 years and a half, because I've seen them operating in different theaters, maybe in the Middle East, in Kuwait, and in the West Bank, working also in Busan, so in South Korea, obviously in Latvia. So I'm very impressed by their work. They are fantastic. And I understand the frustration they've had for years of not being able to have the very equipment they needed. And so they had to go to the emergency all the time. And they were fighting to get attention and to get much more investments. Now the table has turned, because we're at 2% before the end of the year, and we will get to 3.5%. So the culture must change, and the trust must prevail. And I think there's much more openness. And I've been sitting down with some of the generals to have these conversations, to be able to open their eyes on what is needed. But I can't do that alone. And Stephen Fuhr can't do that alone. Or the Minister of Defense can't do that alone. That change must be systemic in the system. It must be more than the political willingness. So obviously my ministry is absolutely involved in the defense industrial strategy. This is a real priority. But I want to be able to put industry players in front of Canadian Forces leadership. I want them to be able to say, here's what I need, here's the problem I have with the equipment I have. Can you solve that? What's the latest, what have you developed? What could we try? And to make sure that you're able to have that real relationship. And I've seen it first eye through what the Ukrainians are doing in Ukraine. And I was in Kyiv a month before the war started, speaking with Zelensky, saying the war was coming, and and how we could help. And then eventually I saw how much the business sector became so interlinked. Because Jeff was giving the example of CD Howe. That's how they're working. They have asks, and the business sector must be able to answer their question. So that's ultimately, that will be a big focus of the defense and industrial strategy, because I think it's fundamental.
Excellent. Thank you, Minister, for your time spent with us. I can't go into double overtime here, even though I wish I could. We had lots of questions, but we very much do view you as our champion for the industry, as the industry minister, and I want to thank you for championing our industry both here amongst your cabinet colleagues and then abroad. It's just so critically important. So again, thank you. And let's give Minister Joly a round of applause.
Thank you so much.